I founded an organization in Baltimore called Rewire for Change with some of the principal cast members from The Wire. So I'd been in the city for, I guess, 5 years or so. I don't, maybe a few years by the time this had happened. And I'd already met Davon Love and Adam Jackson, and I'd met Russell, Chief Russell. He was Major Russell when I met him, became Colonel Russell. And so I'd already been familiar with the folks doing work here. When the uprising occurred, I came back to the city to, just do the work that we do. And when I was there, I heard a lot of folks the conversation was, we want to reframe our narrative. And I was at a point in my own journey with the city and the work there when I was just trying to be really intentional about what I could bring. And when I heard reframing narratives, like, oh, narrative storytelling, that's what I do, you know what I mean? And that's part of the mission of the organization, our access to media. So from there, as we were pulling together a fundraiser for the city, for grassroots community organizations, we were collecting stories of folks who lived in Baltimore in the area where the uprising took place. And as we were collecting those stories to put on stage, to do a stage reading of, we realized that there were, like, the community. That's where I met Shadow. That's where I met Michaela. And I met Devin and Kwame in the process. So it was in that process of putting on that show that we realized that there were these stories, and that the city really wanted to reframe their narrative, and maybe there was some way that I could be useful. And from there, I started vetting that idea with Mark and the other executive producers, and this is how it came into being.
Kwame, the power of this film is that it tells many different parallel stories, yours being one of them. And I wonder, you obviously knew your story very well and maybe knew some of these stories, but probably didn't know some other stories. What's it like for you when you watch all these stories woven together?
I don't think there's, like, it's weird watching the film now. Like, I'm 23 now. All this started when I was 20. So at the time this all started, I didn't know who I was, and I still, have some idea, but I'm still young. I think, like, when we look at a story like this, it shows that we all have one goal. We may have different tactics, but as long as our end goal is reached, we all can be individuals and play our part in changing society. And I think that's a conversation that's not always had. I think there's in our society especially, it's, if you don't do it my way, then it's not the right way. But if we all just do something, then it gets done. And when you see a story like this, it's powerful. It humanizes the same people who were dehumanized for responding to a person whose life was not valued in the presence of police. And I think now, finally, people who don't have a voice or didn't have a voice, not only do we get a voice, but you get to see our stories, and you get to see that the story isn't over, that we're still writing it. And I think that's what's powerful, is that this has no ending, is that we're playing an everyday part in changing society.
Davon, you've been at this a little longer than Kwame, but you're kind of between two generations. We see in this film this really youth movement of 17-year-olds and 20-year-olds, and then we see an older establishment of people who have leadership positions. You kind of fall in between there. I wonder if you can reflect on what the different generations attitudes mean as we figure these things out.
So one of the reasons why I was very thankful for Sonja asking myself and Adam and Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle as an organization to be in the film is that, one of the things that we're really clear about is the importance of the Black radical tradition, right? We live in a society structured on racism and white supremacy in every arena of civil society. And unfortunately, that truth is something that is hard for a lot of audiences to hear. But it really is the only way we can explain things like what happened to Freddie Gray. And one aspect of the way that white supremacy operates in our society is this idea, this notion that the spectacularization of black suffering, right? Where public audiences will consume images of suffering in ways that are almost in ways that people consume horror movies, right? That have very little to do with transforming the conditions that produced what led to the uprising. And so one of the things that I'm thankful for is that we are an example of folks who were trained by black folks with movement history. So we're not just victims of the system, right? But we actually can organize ourselves in such a way where we can wage effective fights against those institutions and structures. And so the other piece I'm thankful for is the fact that the audience gets to listen to some of the structural impediments to police reform, right? So people may hear, talks about racism kind of in a broad sense, but a lot of times people aren't exposed to the nuances as to how the institutions operate that perpetuate the kinds of injustices that the film documents on. And so I think, and a part of our responsibility, so I'm 30, Adam's 29, I'll be 30 soon, and I was actually Kwame's high school debate coach when he was a senior in high school. And one of the things for us that's important is giving young people the tools so that they can navigate these kinds of things with the requisite tools, so they're not merely just spectacles for other people's entertainment, but that you see them as actors in their own reality that can transform society for ourselves.
I'd say your debate skills paid off.
Well,
Can I just make a statement? He said he's 30, so he was 28 when we were, he's not that, there's a generation gap. It's like what, 7 years? I mean, I was knocked out by Davon and Adam when I knew them. I met you guys when you were like 20 and 21, 22, when they were Kwame and Michaela's age. See, and Baltimore has this tradition, there's this tradition of raising up these young folks who are spectacular, and I just believe that folks need to see this, because we see what we see is lazy, what we hear is lazy, we're not working hard enough. We don't see this, and that's what was so important for me. One of the things that was important for me to highlight. Like I said, narratives of power. We really need narratives of power.
And I think it is important to give people roses while they can smell them. As Davon said, he was my high school debate coach, and he's very humble. He actually is responsible for me getting a full scholarship to the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I don't think I've ever thanked you for that. But if you watch the full Geraldo video, I actually wouldn't have approached Geraldo or anybody on the media had it not been for Adam Jackson going after Sean Hannity the night before. So thank you for making me who I am.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yeah, in the back, I see a hand up.
For most folks that have studied revolutions around the world, revolutions are not events. The things that we tend to call revolutions are culminations of a series of things that have happened over a long amount of time. So you can look at the Cuban Revolution, right, and understand that took a long time. You could look at, what happened in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez and the rise of, him in Venezuela, that took several years. You look at the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. You look at all these different revolutions that take time. And again, I think the beauty of this film is you get to actually see some of the work that helps to culminate in those revolutions. Because I think a lot of times, people are looking for the sexy part, right? They're looking for the part that's the kind of glorious scene of victory. And I think it's important to put in context all the things that lead up to it. So it's very important to understand that the industry of policing is led by the Fraternal Order of Police. And in Baltimore, a third of our budget, so $450 to $500 million, goes to the police department every year. So they've essentially become a special interest group funded by public dollars. There's a big divide between the leadership in that industry and the rank and file. So when we talk to police officers, kind of off the record, many of them will say, yeah, I don't understand why it doesn't make sense to have civilians be non-police officers to be a part of the process for discipline. But again, there's an entire industry that's kind of above and beyond them that is in the driver's seat in terms of public policy. And that was the disconnect, is that they were the ones that spoke for all police. When in fact, again, you do have some police that are clear that these problems exist, but just don't have the platform or power in the policy realm to help move things forward.
We have to start wrapping up in here, but I want to ask Marc Levin a question. Marc, you've spent decades making films around justice issues, and I'd love to hear from your perspective what you thought that Sonja brought to this project.
Well, I think she brought a vision, passion, and she had tremendous trust in the community, on all sides of the community, which I think what's unique about this film is that without muting or sanitizing any of the passion and the rage and the anger and the frustration, she showed 360. She showed different sides within the structural racism that you refer to are human beings, all living their own lives. And none of these characters really are stereotypical. They all are conflicted, and they all have things you wouldn't expect. And what moved me most was at the end of the film, as much as I agree with you, at a time where we're such a hyper-partisan society, where it's so hard for people to talk to each other, I felt that we were seeing people in one family, maybe dysfunctional family at times and conflicted family, but who were all connected in ways that we might not imagine. That was a revelation to me, and I give Sonja tremendous credit and everybody that worked with her.
So, Sonja, as a last question, I mean, you have tremendous skill that we know as an actor. After this project of directing, can we expect to see more working more in this area?
You know, documentary is really unique. You know, for me, it has to be. This was a labor of love. It was a passion project. It was a project that really was a consequence of the work that I was already doing in Baltimore, not the other way around. And documentary is rough. I come from a narrative world.
But Sonja, one thing I just want to add is, we met in Slam when we made Slam almost 20 years ago. And I think back, Sonja, Saul Williams, Bo, everyone that was part of that experience has stayed true to themselves. None has just kind of bought the ticket to fame and fortune. Everyone has stayed true. So when Sonja showed up again in that circle, I was very moved, and I hope you do go on in this field.
Well, first, and I want to say this because you're not going to ask this question, but I have to say this. Because I did meet Marc 20 years ago at the beginning of my career, when I didn't even really know that I was committing to acting. And I have been so fortunate to be connected to people who, of principle. I know Marc's father, who's no longer with us, who was an old radical, like even more extreme than you. I love your daddy. I know the history where he comes from, and the fact that, you know, between Marc Levin and David Simon, I mean, these are the people that kept me in the business, because these were people of principle who were doing this work. And I could not have done this film if this man did not believe in me, because I did not think I was going to direct this film. There are 3 other executive producers: Marc Levin, Anthony Hemingway, and George Pelicanos, and Mark Taylor. I thought that Marc Levin or Anthony Hemingway were going to direct this film because they were the directors, and both of them had projects that for the year that they were, and Marc said, "You have to direct it. You know the story, you know the people, you have to direct it, and you can do it. And I will support you in that." And I want to say, that was 4 men, 2 white men, 2 black men. Men are getting, you know, they're getting their just due right now. You know, some of the ones who've been doing what they've been doing. But I just got to say, I have to put that story out, because I didn't know I could do this. And if you and Anthony and George and the rest of y'all didn't convince me that I could do it, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you.